All right, so today we are going to do a deep dive into immigration strategy.
That's good.
I have a ton of sources here that you sent over,
Okay.
and it seems like there's a lot of emphasis on avoiding like these huge pitfalls that you can run into
Yeah,
if you don't know what you're doing.
that's right.
Um, so I guess before we jump into specifics, like what's the biggest thing that you would say someone should keep in mind when they're thinking about immigration strategy?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that immigration, it's a long game.
Okay.
You really need to be prioritizing long-term security
Right.
over those tempting short-term savings.
So it's not about being like penny wise and pound foolish.
Exactly.
Okay. And one of the examples that these sources bring up is the H-4 EAD. Now, for
Yes.
people who don't know, just to level set us here, that's the work permit for spouses of H-1B visa holders.
Right.
And it sounds like one of the common mistakes is people thinking, oh, well, my spouse's EAD is good for another year.
Right.
We can wait to renew, save a little bit on that filing fee.
Yeah, and you know, it makes sense on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, USCIS processing times, especially these days,
Oh, yeah.
they're so unpredictable.
Right.
And, you know, we're not just talking a few weeks delay here.
Right.
We're talking 6 months.
Wow.
12 months, even longer sometimes.
So that wait and see approach
Yeah,
can really backfire.
it definitely can.
So, like, paint me a picture here. What's a worst case scenario?
Okay, so imagine this. Your spouse is working, everything's going great,
Right.
and then boom, their EAD expires before the new one comes through.
Oh, no.
Now they're out of a job.
Oof. That's not good.
Yeah, and this happens a lot more than you think.
Right.
And it's not just about losing income, right?
Right.
This can really derail careers, put a huge strain on families.
Yeah, lots of stress.
A ton of stress.
So if there's one thing that our listeners should take away from this, when it comes to that EAD, what would it be?
Don't wait till the last minute.
Okay.
Renew it early. It's better to have those cards overlap
Oh.
than to risk a gap.
So it's like insurance.
Exactly. Think of it as an insurance policy
Okay.
against those USCIS processing times.
All right. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
So another thing that these sources dive into is green cards.
Okay.
And they seem to stress that it's really important to have a backup plan.
Yes. Especially if your green card is tied to your employer.
Okay. So why is that?
Well, a lot of people don't realize this, but if your I-140,
Right.
which is like the initial petition for an employment-based green card,
Yeah.
if that's employer-sponsored and you switch jobs, you might have to restart that whole green card process.
Well, really, start all over.
Yeah, it's a risk, and it has to do with what's called priority dates.
Okay.
You know, that's basically your place in line for the green card.
So you're telling me if I switch jobs and I have to restart, my priority date gets reset.
It could, yeah.
Wow.
And here's another thing.
Okay.
You know, even if it seems like your priority date's years away,
Right.
these sources talk about how, like back in 2020, priority dates for some categories unexpectedly moved forward a ton.
Wow.
So people who had backup plans, they were ready to pounce.
Right.
But the people who didn't, they were kind of left scrambling.
Yeah. So like everyone was caught off guard.
Yeah.
So what's a good example of a backup plan that people can have?
Well, the EB-2 NIW, or the National Interest Waiver, can be a really good option.
Okay. Now break that down for me. What is that?
So the NIW, it's a self-petitioned green card.
Okay.
So that means it's tied to you, not your employer.
Gotcha.
So even if you switch jobs, your NIW priority date, it stays with you.
Oh.
So it gives you more control, more flexibility.
So it's like insurance for your green card.
It is kind of like that.
Okay.
It might not make the process faster overall,
Right.
but it does give you that security and
Ah.
that portability,
Especially in today's job market.
especially now. Yeah,
People are switching jobs all the time.
exactly.
Okay. So I'm starting to see like we need to be thinking several steps ahead with this stuff.
Absolutely.
And one other scenario that comes up in these sources
Okay.
is what happens if you get a new job.
Right.
You're excited.
Yeah.
You're going to transfer your H-1B.
Right.
And then your new employer says, hey, we'll cover your H-1B costs.
Oh.
But you're on your own for your spouse's H-4 and EAD.
Right.
Ouch.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that situation?
Well, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, who wants to spend extra money if they don't have to?
Right.
But these sources really make a good point
Okay.
about aligning your family's immigration status.
What does that mean? Aligning.
So it means making sure everyone's paperwork, everyone's visa status,
Right.
they're all in sync,
Okay.
moving together as smoothly as possible.
Gotcha.
So if that new employer won't file for your spouse's H-4 and EAD at the same time as your H-1B transfer,
Uh-oh.
It can cause delays, gaps in their work authorization.
And we know those gaps can be costly,
Huge problems.
not just financially, but just like stress-wise.
Big-
So it sounds like even though it might seem like a big expense up front,
Right.
to pay for those H-4 and EAD costs yourself,
Yeah,
it might save you headaches and money in the long run.
it might.
It's all about that long-term perspective,
Exactly.
thinking about those consequences of those short-term savings.
That's it.
Okay, and let's not forget USCIS processing times.
Oh,
They can be all over the
yeah.
place.
Unpredictable.
The sources you shared mentioned H-4 and H-4 EAD applications,
Yeah,
taking anywhere from 6 to 12 months,
or even longer.
or even longer. Wow.
Yeah,
So that's a long time to be in limbo.
it really is.
And during that time, if your spouse can't work
Right.
because their EAD is expired,
Yeah,
that lost income adds up.
it adds up quickly.
So I'm getting the message. Don't procrastinate.
Right.
Be proactive. Think about those long-term costs.
That's right.
Okay, well, there's definitely more to this immigration puzzle,
Oh, yeah.
but I think we need to take a little break.
Sounds good.
We'll be back with more tips and strategies to help you navigate this whole immigration world.
All right.
So stay tuned.
We'll be right back.
Okay, so we're back and ready to keep going deeper into this immigration strategy stuff.
Right.
One thing that keeps coming up in these sources is timing,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to job changes and making sure your family's immigration status is like aligned,
Right.
because it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new opportunity
Yeah.
and maybe not think about how it impacts like everyone involved.
You're absolutely right. It's like this whole domino effect.
Okay.
Your visa status impacts your spouses, which impacts their ability to work and so on.
Right, right.
So let's say you're on an H-1B and your spouse is on an H-4 with an EAD.
Okay.
So they can work
Right.
when you switch jobs.
Okay.
That new H-1B petition is going to affect their status too.
So it's not just about transferring my own visa.
Right.
It's about making sure my spouse's H-4 and EAD are transferred and updated as well.
Exactly. And this is where it's so important to be proactive
Okay.
and communicate with your new employer.
Right.
You need to make sure they understand that those H-4 and EAD applications need to be filed
Okay.
at the same time as your H-1B transfer.
Gotcha. So what happens if they don't?
Well, you're basically running the risk of delays,
Right.
and you could end up with gaps in your spouse's work authorization.
And we talked about how those gaps are not good.
Big problems.
Huge financial hit and a lot of stress for everyone.
Absolutely.
So it almost sounds like even if my new employer is hesitant to cover those H-4 and EAD costs,
Yeah,
it might be worth it to just pay for them myself.
it really might.
I can see some people pushing back on that, like, why should I pay when my employer could?
I know.
But it sounds like it's all about weighing those risks.
It is. You got to think about the potential consequences. That cost of filing those applications.
Right.
It's probably a lot less than the cost of your spouse losing their job.
Right, or having to stop working.
Yeah. We're dealing with all that stress and uncertainty.
So it really is about that long-term thinking.
It all comes back to that.
Okay, and another part of that long-term thinking is having a backup plan.
Yes.
Remember we talked about the EB-2 NIW?
Do national interest waiver.
Right, the one that's not tied to your employer.
Exactly.
So having that NIW, it's almost like,
Like an insurance policy.
yeah,
Yeah, it gives you that peace of mind,
that flexibility
especially in today's job market.
where you might not stay at the same company for years and years.
Things change so quickly.
Exactly. So it's like having that escape hatch if things go wrong.
Yeah, you're not at the mercy of your employer's decisions.
So it's about taking control of your own immigration journey.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, and one thing these sources really emphasize is that you
Yeah.
can't control everything.
That's for sure.
There are just some things, like USCIS processing times,
Yeah.
that are totally out of your hands.
Right, and that's why being proactive is so important. Don't wait to the last minute to file those renewals.
Okay.
Earlier is always better.
Okay, so even if that means there's some overlap with my current EAD,
Right?
it's worth it for that peace of mind,
It really is.
knowing that I'm not like cutting it close.
Exactly.
So no playing chicken with those deadlines.
Nope.
All right, and I can see how that kind of planning is extra important.
Yeah,
If you're in a field where you have to have a certain license to work,
absolutely.
or if even like a short gap in your employment could have a huge impact.
You're right.
It's all about understanding your own specific situation
Right.
and kind of tailoring your immigration strategy accordingly.
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another.
Right, so you got to think about your own needs and goals.
Absolutely.
And speaking of individual circumstances,
Yeah.
these sources also talk about the emotional side of all this.
That's a really good point.
Because We often focus on like the practical stuff, the logistics,
Right, the paperwork.
but there's this whole emotional weight that comes with it.
Absolutely. The uncertainty,
Yeah.
the waiting, the feeling of being in limbo.
It can be exhausting.
It can really wear people down.
It's like this invisible weight that
Yeah.
people are carrying around.
Yeah.
And it can be hard to talk about.
Especially when you're already dealing with so much else.
So what can we do to help?
Well, I think for one thing, we can just talk about it.
Yeah.
Normalize those feelings of stress and anxiety
Right.
and encourage people to reach out for support.
Yeah.
There are communities and organizations and resources out there
Right.
to help people through this.
Because it's not just about paperwork and deadlines.
It's about people's lives,
Yeah.
their dreams, their families.
It's a good reminder that there's a human side to all of this.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we wrap up,
Okay.
there's one more area I want to explore.
All right.
It's about the potential pitfalls of like trying to cut corners or take shortcuts in this whole immigration process.
All right.
So we'll be back in just a minute to dive into that. And we are back for the final part of our deep dive.
All right.
One thing that really stood out to me in these sources
Okay.
is almost like a warning about trying to take shortcuts
Oh, yeah.
with immigration.
But, right. It's like they always say, if it sounds too good to be true,
Yeah.
it probably is.
Exactly.
Especially when it comes to something as important as your immigration status.
Right,
Cutting corners or, relying on bad info.
right.
It can have some pretty bad consequences.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's so tempting,
Oh, yeah.
when you're feeling overwhelmed
Absolutely.
to just grab onto anything that looks like a quick fix.
Yeah. You want that guaranteed result.
Yeah.
But these sources really stress how important it is to
Oh, okay.
do your research,
Right.
make sure the information you're getting is good.
Right. And make sure you're working with like reputable sources.
Exactly.
So like watch out for those immigration consultants
Oh, yeah.
or notarios.
Right. Those folks might not actually have the right qualifications.
Right. Like they don't really know the law.
Exactly.
So it's almost like going to a doctor who didn't go to medical school.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't trust them with your health.
Right.
So why would you trust them with your immigration future?
Exactly. It's so important to get advice from people who actually know what they're doing.
So you're talking about qualified immigration
Yep.
attorneys.
Yeah, folks who are actually licensed to practice law.
Right. They know the rules inside and out.
Exactly. And immigration law is complicated.
Oh, for sure.
It's always changing.
So the message is clear.
Yeah,
Do your homework.
absolutely.
Check their credentials.
Yep.
Ask for referrals.
Uh-huh.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
You got to make sure you're comfortable with them.
And if something feels off
Right.
or too good to be true,
Like we said before, it probably is.
it probably is.
Sometimes the best way to go is just the straightforward way.
Okay.
Follow the rules. File your applications the right way, on time.
Be patient.
Be patient. Exactly.
Yeah, the immigration system can be slow,
It can be.
but trying to like game the system
Yeah.
or take shortcuts.
It's just going to cause more problems later.
So it's like building a house on a bad foundation.
Yeah. Eventually, it's all going to come crashing down.
So ultimately, it's about protecting yourself
Right.
and your future.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are like the big things you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important things are
Okay.
think about the long term.
Okay.
Be proactive.
Right.
Communicate clearly.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to get help.
Right. Seek out those experts.
Exactly when you need
And
it.
don't fall for those shortcuts.
No shortcut.
Remember, Rome wasn't built in a day,
That's right.
and neither is a successful immigration journey.
Exactly. It takes time and effort.
Well said.
Thanks.
So, immigration, it can be tough, it can be complicated,
It can.
but with the right approach and the right mindset,
Definitely.
it can also be really rewarding.
It can.
So we'll leave you with this. Knowledge is power.
I like that.
The more you know about the immigration system,
Yeah.
the better you'll be able to navigate it
Absolutely.
and create the future that you want.
Well said.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
We hope it's been helpful and insightful.
We'll see you next time.